Hi, everybody. Hello. How's everybody doing? Who's ready for some drinks? I'm all that stands between you and drinks. So don't worry, I'm going to make this good and short and fast and funny, hopefully. My name's Afdhel Aziz. I'm a Los Angelino. I live about 20 minutes away in West Adams. I am the founder and chief purpose officer of Conspiracy of Love. What is Conspiracy of Love, you might ask? Is it a cult? Is it some sort of movement? It is a strategic purpose consultancy. What that means is we go and work with some of the biggest companies on the planet. We work with Adidas, with Microsoft, with a whole bunch of companies like that. And I describe my job as like the movie Inception, which is I have one job. I have to go into these companies and plant one idea in their heads, which is how can you make more money by doing more good? And so that's what we were able to do at Conspiracy. And I'm really pleased over the last few years we've helped put money into causes ranging from food insecurity to racial justice in education to arts and education funding. And so I'm really fulfilled in the work that I get to do with these companies. I spent 20 years inside these companies. I worked for Nokia and Heineken and Absolute Vodka. And I did a lot of cool things with them. I did partnerships with Lady Gaga and Coachella and Art Basel. And then I had this weird thing where the cool stopped being cool. I don't know if any of you guys have had this problem. I got to the point where I was like, this is no longer fun. And so I had to set out to find something else to do, which is how I ended up in my day job of running Conspiracy of Love. But I want to talk to you guys about today is something else that has been on my mind for a while, and that hence the intriguing title, The Hope Gap, Star Trek, and Why We Need a Storytelling Moonshot. And so I want to start this journey by telling you a little bit about growing up. I grew up in Sri Lanka. Hands up if you know where Sri Lanka is. Okay, pretty well-educated audience. It's a little tiny island on the southern tip of India, in case you didn't know. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. I grew up there. I left when I was 17. And I was a huge nerd when I was a kid. Some would argue I'm still a huge nerd. But this is the kind of nerd I was, where I was so into reading and books that I was a member of 3 different libraries. And then I made my parents become members of those libraries. And then I would use their cards to borrow 12 books at a time. And just, yes, I didn't have a lot of friends as a kid growing up. So books were my escape. And when I was growing up, I loved science fiction. And science fiction in the 70s and 80s in Sri Lanka growing up was my salvation. And so I loved stories from people like Isaac Asimov, who wrote incredible books like the Robot Trilogy, or if you guys saw Foundation on Apple TV, amazing, amazing series. I love the work of Ray Bradbury, who wrote Fahrenheit 451 and wrote about censorship. And so I grew up reading these science fiction stories, and my favorite was Dr. Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote books like 2001, A Space Odyssey. And he's somebody who I admired greatly because his work actually led to scientific breakthroughs. So I don't know if you know this, but in his books, he came up with the idea of geostationary satellites that are in one place in orbit around the world. And in honor of him coming up with that idea, NASA called it the Clarke Belt. It is called the Clarke Belt because he was the one who came up with the idea of these satellites that we have today. And I was a 17-year-old kid now studying for a degree in English literature in London. I moved to London, I was studying at King's College there, and I was writing a thesis on how to turn books into films. I thought, maybe I could do 2001. And I started writing this paper, and then I went back to Sri Lanka on vacation, and that's when I realized, oh, Arthur C. Clarke lives in Sri Lanka. In fact, this is a picture of his office in Sri Lanka, and somehow I finagled a way to spend a day with him in this very office. I was a skinny brown kid who had zero right to be there, but I was like, hey, can I interview you for this paper? And so I had the greatest day you could have, nerding out with him about him and Stanley Kubrick writing this movie together. And he told me so much about the behind-the-scenes stuff that went on there. And I actually asked him, I was like, Dr. Clarke, you remember in 2001 there's like a big psychedelic, like 10 minutes of just like trippy, hallucinogenic, like, going through like a wormhole or something. I was like, Dr. Clarke, did you ever take any hallucinogens or psychedelic drugs? And he said, and I quote, well, I didn't, but the special effects boys sure did. I'd never plucked up the courage to ask him if Stanley Kubrick had taken some of those as well, but you heard it hot off the press. And so this love of sci-fi that I had growing up also manifested into TV, and that's where, like many of you growing up, Star Trek was a huge influence in my life. And we used to get Star Trek in Sri Lanka, right? In the first days of color TV, which is in the 1980s, this is one of the first imports that we'd get, and we'd watch this incredible show that was so optimistic, that was so full of hope about this intergalactic, interplanetary, multi-species armada of humanity going out there to try and help the world, right? And I realized I was not alone in Star Trek being a huge influence on me when I started to read about all these actual NASA scientists who said, well, the reason I became a NASA scientist was because of Star Trek. It fueled a desire in me to want to go into space. This amazing picture here on the left, Samantha Cristoforetti, on the day that Leonard Nimoy died, she took this picture to signal how much he meant to her. And so many other scientists have said that was the reason I went into technology, into aeronautics, into engineering, you know. And so when sci-fi is done right, it can have an incredible impact on the world. It can spark the passion of young people. It can spark imagination and innovation like nothing else can. And so that's where it dawned on me that since that time, though, things have taken a bit of a turn for the worst, in that we no longer have those utopian visions of the world. In fact, things have become pretty fucking dark. Excuse my French, right? So here's a few examples that I managed to pull out there in terms of just what's out there in the zeitgeist, right? Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner, 1982. Los Angeles on fire, basically, with heat lightning. Blade Runner in 2017. Los Angeles, still on fire, now has giant seawalls protecting it from climate change and flooding. I Am Legend, Will Smith alone in New York with a zombie apocalypse and a dog, and no one's alive, no one's in there. WALL-E, Pixar getting into this. It's a robot on a trash planet where everybody has left, humanity has just left the building, and there's a solo robot just picking up our garbage as well. Snowpiercer, if you remember this movie, incredible movie. Humanity, it now only exists on a train, circling the planet endlessly. The whole of humanity is just in coach class. Some of people are lucky enough to be in first class. TV, by the way, no different. Black Mirror, an incredibly depressing series about our reliance on technology and how we're just, slaves to technology. The Handmaid's Tale, super fun, precursor for what's happening in Roe versus Wade right now, right? Snowpiercer, so good, they're like, that wasn't depressing enough, let's make a TV show out of it, Let's bring it back for a series and depress even more people about this as well. This is my favorite. They just ran out of titles. They were just like, I'm not gonna give it a try. This show is called Dystopia, and I wanna read you the logline. In our future, all the children are dying. We have the ability to save them. All we have to do is kill everyone else. Sundays at 9 p.m. Cheer you right up before you head out into your work week. And so what is going on? By the way, advertising, the world that I come from, brands, no different. Everybody remembers this Apple ad, right? Remember the 1984 kind of thing with a hammer thrower destroying Big Brother? This is an ad for Sony PlayStation, another post-apocalyptic wasteland. This is an ad for Motorola, which again returns us to that Big Brother-esque kind of just dark, depressing future as well. So something is going on in our zeitgeist where we are being fed images of dystopia, of apocalypse, of failure. And all of this stuff is having an impact on people. And this is the impact that I want to talk about today. Oh, by the way, here's the only example of a positive utopian technology-driven future. Can anyone guess what this is? Wakanda forever! Yeah. This is the only example. This is an incredible essay you should check out by Kendra Peerless. It's like, Wakanda is the only example of a positive future where we are in harmony with nature, where technology is helping people. And that is a terrible, terrible thought, right? There's only one positive example of this working out. So all of this stuff has had an impact on people. And so I discovered this thing called the hope gap. This is a bunch of scientists at Yale who measured this. This is the red line is people who are worried. This is specifically about climate change and global warming, but I would argue you can extend the metaphor of the hope gap to everything. Look at the red line. 62% of the people who are worried about the world versus 41% who are hopeful. Now look at where the trend lines are going. They're not going in a good place. That gap is widening, right? This is, I think, the meta problem that we are dealing with today. A sense of despair and hopelessness that we cannot do anything to help solve the problems of the world. And this problem is now manifesting itself in really, really scary ways, especially as it regards to mental health, to psychological safety. These are people saying, I suffer from climate despair. It's making me want to give up on life. It's manifesting itself in terms of kids suffering from climate anxiety. One of the most terrifying pieces of data I read in a research report was 67% of 6 to 9-year-olds believe that their primary motive in life will be saving the world. I will repeat that. 67% of 6 to 9-year-olds think that their job will be to save the world. I have an 8-year-old son, and I can't imagine the psychological weight of that on his brain right now. It is leading people to even think about not having kids. So there is an increasing number of people who are really taking a hard look at the moral sanity of bringing a child into this world, right? And saying, I don't feel like I want to bring a child into this craziness, right? And this quote from a friend of mine really just blew my mind. She said, it may be time to sit our kids down and have a conversation with them about not having their own children. Wow. That is species extinction we're talking about, if everybody starts thinking like that. So all of this stuff out there in the zeitgeist, in the news, in the algorithms that is dragging us down into this making this hope gap wider, we got to come up with a way to combat it. And to me, one of the few places that has the power to combat that is pop culture. Pop culture, storytelling, TVs, movies, what a lot of you guys do here today, which is why I said I want to come and talk to this audience. Because if anybody can start to think about how storytelling can fill the hope gap, it's got to be people at this Entertainment Impact Summit. You're thinking about the intersection of that thing. And it's great that you guys are thinking about greening your productions. It is great that you're thinking about diversity and equality in your companies. But there is a bigger task, which is the stories themselves need to change. We need to come up with a whole storytelling moonshot. It's got to be like the Manhattan Project of storytelling, because the alternative, as you're seeing, is not good. Humanity needs a new story. We need new myths. Myths where we're like, we fixed this problem. We are fixing this problem. Here's what you can do to help fix this problem as well. So I wrote this op-ed in Ad Age last year, which is actually me saying the same thing, but to the world that I come from, which is advertising and brands. But the point remains the same. The problem of climate change is no longer a problem of science. The scientists have done everything they can. They have told us until they're blue in the face the data. The problem of climate change is now a failure of storytelling. We need to tell better stories about it. We tell stories of hope. We tell stories of people who are fixing this problem. And we need to give people a role in that story so they can become heroes in it as well. We need to say, here's what you can do, and here's how it's helping as well. So that's where, if I think about those kids out there who are challenging us to say, enough with the blah, 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 as Greta Thunberg says, then for them, we need to figure out how to tell a new story that inspires us to take actions so that we can leave the planet better than we found it for them. It's not for us. We're only going to be around for a finite number of time. We need to think about what's happening down the line. And so I love this quote from Michael K. Williams, who's an incredible artist who was taken from us far too soon. I like this quote. He said, stop thinking about it, try dreaming about it. Maybe that's what we need to do. I feel like we need to just unleash our collective moral imaginations, all of our creativity to come up with these new stories, to come up with new ways of telling the story of who we are as a humanity, as a species, in ways that are positive, in ways that give people a chance to take action. So this is my call to action. This is my call to arms. I need like the best goddamn storytellers on the planet. I need the Ridley Scotts. I need the James Camerons. Please stop making movies about other planets, no matter how gorgeous they are. Make movies about our planet. And show how our planet is so beautiful that it needs saving, and show people how they can take action to save it. Pop culture is one of the few weapons that are big enough to take this on. Storytelling is an engine that can change the world. In fact, I would argue that's the only thing that's ever changed the world. And so right here in the world capital of storytelling, in a city built by story, this is where this needs to start happening now. And what we need to do is to find ways to take all of that creativity in stories, in production, in CGI, and start telling new stories. And it's not just telling new stories, it's who we tell these stories to as well. Because here's the other thing I want to talk about. I spend a lot of time thinking about the difference between the activists and the altruists. Maybe 10% of people on this planet are activists. God bless them. The world needs them. There is plenty of stories for them. This is the stuff that is out there on PBS. This is the stuff that is out there on Sundance Channel. Incredible documentaries that are doing an incredible job, but they're reaching only 10% of people. I believe 90% of people are altruists. The people out there who want to do something good in the world but have no idea where to start, and who are so polarized against each other that they're not even thinking about how we can get together. We need to start making stories for them. That's where Hollywood and pop culture comes in. That scale, that reach, is how you reach the majority of people, not the 10% who are already on board with these solutions. And it's not just the who, it's the how. You got to make it cool. Cool is an underutilized weapon in good. Cool hacks your limbic system from fear into joy. Look at what Tesla did with cars. I mean, electric cars, cool. Look at what's happening out there in the world of food, where it's no longer eat your vegetables. It's like, look at this sexy plant-based diet over here. Don't you want to eat this? Think about all the fashion brands that you love, which are super cool, but also incredibly sustainable and ethical, right? That's what we need in storytelling. We need to use the power of cool to get more people to do more good. We need to unleash that as a weapon. And the final thing is to think about really who we're doing this for in terms of an intergenerational approach. It's no longer enough to give back, we must pay it forward. We are not doing this for ourselves anymore. We're doing this for our children and our children's children, so that they inherit a better world. There's this great quote, a proverb, which says, a wise civilization is one in which we plant trees that we will never see the shade of. That's what we need to do now. It may be too late for us to do anything else but adapt to the worst effects of climate change, but unless we act now, in 2 or 3 generations, there is not going to be a planet worth inheriting. So that's what we need to change our direction and think about being a good ancestor, not just a good citizen right now. So I want to end with this quote from Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, who said, "It isn't all over. Everything has not been invented. The human adventure is just beginning." So my plea to you today is, think about who you have in your worlds who can tell these stories, and encourage them to go out there and tell a new story so that we as humanity can dream a little bit bigger together. Thank you very much. All right. I think we have time for a Q&A. Does anybody have a microphone that they want to put out in the audience? There we go. Gentleman with the microphone, yeah. Any questions?
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
So I've had lots of different conversations relating to kind of this topic. So I'm involved in the impact investing community, as some other people here are. And it's been really interesting as this topic very recently that has been discussed about ways to portray solutions that are taking place in the venture ecosystem to solve major problems, say that we're investing in. And one of the things that we found is there's been a disconnect on the way that, say, media or documentaries portray things to kind of glorify a problem with like a glimmer of hope, but it doesn't really show in a very actionable way,
Yeah.
like where the solutions are, because there are solutions. And then more so how those people can get involved in those solutions. Now, you mentioned one thing about, making things cool, and absolutely, there's definitely a hook there, get people interested and involved. Like, what other ways are you thinking about it on that kind of disconnect?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that. So one of the things we're thinking about doing now with our clients on the brand side is do branded content, right? And so one of the content ideas we're developing is an idea called the solutionaries. And I don't know if you guys have heard that word, a solutionary, but that's a great word. A solutionary is somebody who is having a systemic, systems-level, revolutionary solution to a problem. And by showcasing the stories of these solutionaries, who are founders of incredible companies tackling everything from food to transport to fashion, that's the first step, to just show that there are good people with big brains and even bigger hearts working on the problem. The second thing is then what you do with all the energy that is unleashed by sharing these stories out there. And the way we frame it in an impact kind of activation spectrum is everybody has time, talent, treasure. Some people have time. Some people don't have any money, but they have the ability to donate their talents. Some people have only money because they don't have time. Whatever it is, it really is about creating a spectrum of engagement. So once people watch this content, they have something to do. That's where it might be, hey, you saw this founder, here's how you can crowdfund in her next series of investment. Hey, you saw this founder, here's where you can buy their product and support them. Or if you can't do any of those things, here's how you can just share their story. But once you create that energy, then it's about creating that impact framework to say to people, what can you do with this? Because then you're involving them. One of the big principles we talk about in our work is be the helper, not the hero. And we give this advice to brands all the time. Don't get out there and make yourself the hero of this journey. Create space where people can be the heroes by doing something, by participating as well. So whatever that metric is, it's about making sure that people can get involved in it, because that instills their sense of hope as well. Yeah? Hope that helped. Yeah, thank you.
I was going to say, you should definitely check out tomorrow's panel, as we'll talk about ethical climate storytelling. So recommend that. But I just wanted to say I am like a independent environmental media creator, and you talk a lot about climate storytelling and being able to kind of talk about those solutions. And often at times we know that many of the climate solution documentaries that are out there are typically written and produced by people who don't look like us, who don't come from those communities that experience the injustices that are currently happening. And so I actually was in Asia for a month with my best friend over here, trying to produce a documentary trailer. And one of the biggest issues that we face in producing independent media is kind of like funding, right? I think as many people would suggest, we'll just apply for grants, right? And I think that's kind of one of the largest struggles for independent media people, is that, we're not going to take time to criticize all these like large networks who are producing these documentaries, right? We're going to take initiative to try to create our own, but that's another issue where it's like we don't get the funding, and sometimes it's a tedious process where it's like then we have to go to the corporate route, and then corporations try to overtake the image of that or try to control the project. And in that process itself, you kind of lose the messaging. And so I guess what would you recommend for young creators or creatives in this space to navigate this industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. And I'm going to ask my friend Farhood to help answer it, because he's an amazing filmmaker who's doing this right now. But while he's thinking about putting him on the spot, I'll tell you two quick things. You can judge people's, how can I put it? When I think about the people inside corporations, I think about incredible men and women who are as passionate about this topic as you. I don't think about the faceless corporations and them just acting in a kind of a woolly mammoth kind of way where they're out of control. They're in that system, and they got to make it work within that system too. So the people that we have as our clients inside these giant companies, they're as activists as you are or I am. They just got to do it inside a different system. And they got to show the ROI of it. So they can say, hey, we spent X $100,000 funding this documentary, but here's how it shifted our brand. Here's how it shifted the affinity of how people see this company. That's how they can go to the CFO and say, hey, can you give me some more money for next year? Right? So first of all, understand that they have a certain kind of set of criteria they need to meet. The creativity comes in finding that common ground so the viewer isn't snapped out of the dream you're creating with a terrible product placement or like a very kind of janky kind of like integration of things like that. And so to me, it's a creative problem. It's not a problem of two people with different morals. It's just a creative problem that we haven't cracked yet. And so when I look at the fact that there's maybe 100 billion plus in streaming commissions over the last 10 years that have appeared out of nowhere, and I look at brands and say, hey guys, you are losing the ability to advertise because people are moving into ad-free networks like streaming environments. There's only one answer. You have to get good enough to produce content that appears in that streaming field. Do it in a way that justifies your ROI, but do it in a way where the quality of the product is unimpeachable as well. And so I come back to that's a creative problem. That's not a battle between two different warring ideologies. It's just we haven't figured out how to bridge both of those people's needs as well. Now I've tapped out enough. Farhood can answer this next part of the question. And tell people what you do as well, by the way.
Okay. Hi. My name is Farhood. I'm a... Oh, yeah, sure. Hi, everybody.
You got suckered into this.
So I'm a writer, director, producer, and an entrepreneur. And my background's actually in law. And I was told for a long time that there wasn't a place for me in Hollywood. And I really felt that way. And I think the pivot point was when I took the risk to do what you're doing now and really believed in myself. And actually, when I started to create content, specifically content that transforms consciousness, creates culture change, but I wanted to do it in a very commercially viable capacity, right? Now, what was really interesting about that was no one in Hollywood gave a shit about that. And I came in maybe 13, 14 years ago. It wasn't popular. These things weren't happening. I really had nowhere to go. And what was really interesting was the brands embraced me. The brands gave us budgets to create the shows that none of the networks wanted to make because they were terrified and they were afraid. So I actually have incredible experiences of making content with brands. But I think the key to communicating with these folks is to put yourself in their perspective and to understand and appreciate what matters to them. And to recognize that, by and large, they have these things they need to do and that you as a creative can inspire them, that you can really bring this creativity to them. I think the pivot point for me was when I realized it wasn't about selling projects to brands. It was more, can I create culture change for that person? So they get excited and they become the ally, and then here we are making the first ever Lexus campaign that doesn't have a car in it, and it's all about giving and receiving around the holidays because it's cool, So now kind of connecting more into this environmental space, after I'd sold my previous venture, I started a new company, and I really wanted to make content that could reach across the aisle, right? There is so much echo chamber stuff that is made for the people in this room. And if we really want to make a change, shouldn't we reach out to the people that don't agree with us? And shouldn't that be the creative opportunity? So I created a television show called Earthbound, which was my effort to reach conservative people and to reach the faith-based audience and to say, hey, well, what if I don't talk about climate change, but I'm going to show you all the dimensions of climate change that exist without really setting off your trigger. And I went to a family office and got the capital for it. So what I would invite you to do as a creative right now is to recognize that being a business person and recognizing how the game is played, because we can talk for hours about how we were excluded from this game, right? But now we're here. So how can we create ventures and businesses and intellectual property that can be maximized across multiple pathways, podcast, book, film, and own that property? And also reach out to people that are left out of the conversation, because as people who are excluded, we can connect with that as well. So really, like, if you strip it away, is how do we as creatives channel empathy and understanding and make that louder than the anger that everyone is feeling right now? Because fundamentally, that anger is not going to get us to a solution that really resonates with the audience that you're trying to reach. So,
amen. You're like, Farida's like, you just told me to come along and sit in the audience, man. Like, what are you doing to me, man? Thank you for that. You know, the polarization point, there's somebody over here who wants to take. The polarization point is really worth talking about, because we're going to need everybody to get out of this problem. And if half the country is hating the other half because of things that we say to each other, then we're fucked. Then we're truly fucked. And so to get out of that, I'm writing an article, which is actually, I'm declaring a war on polarization. And I'm like, I'm not going to hate anybody anymore because of what they believe. I'm going to find that common ground, because there's always a common ground to find. And by diffusing it, by taking it out of the talking points and just into what people really believe as human beings, as fathers and mothers and sons and daughters, I believe that's the bridge that will make us all go, hang on a second, we all have kids. We all want them to come out of this alive. And so we got to put down our plowshares and turn our swords into plowshares to figure this shit out together. So that's why I heartily endorse what Farida is doing, to say you got to go talk to red state people. You go talk to them and say, there's people who love you, and we need to figure this stuff out together and get out of that echo chamber as well. Yes. Yeah, over here.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Who has the microphone? Who pass the microphone? Yeah, go for it, and then keep going. Yeah.
You probably saw my face light up when you put the photo of Wakanda. I'm a huge Marvel fan, but I'm a huge fan of Wakanda specifically because I'm like a policy wonk, right? So it was really interesting. A lot of the think pieces that came out of Black Panther was on what world building in that way, like what ramifications it could have for environmental governance and governance in Africa, for instance.
Yeah.
And I think an untapped component of storytelling, and for instance, climate storytelling, is in the ways that it can actually implement changes in the environmental governance space. So I'm curious on what your thoughts are on how world building can help support the environmental governance realm, putting forth policies that are actively, in the real world, tangibly building a world that is, like you said, one that future generations can live by. And then also, I think that something that Wakanda does is the lens that it builds upon is like very Afro-futuristic. And I don't think it's an accident that that's one of the only futuristic realms that showcases this possible future. I don't think it's an accident that it is an Afrofuturistic lens as well. So I'm curious on what other lenses you've seen that have been able to do something similar and what that can mean for storytelling moving forward.
It's a great question. Thank you. I'll start by talking about one thing that I haven't cracked as yet, right? Which is, how do you make great art where there's a message in it without the message turning people off to the art? That's a really hard problem to crack. Because either you end up making stuff that is, you take a really important topic and you make it frivolous, or you take something and you make it so dense and earnest and eat your vegetables, people are like, I don't have time for this stuff. That's why Wakanda was interesting. It was in a Marvel movie, in a gigantically budgeted Marvel movie, and millions of people saw it, and it was done to the highest standard of creativity. It looked cool. Like, I want to live in Wakanda. Like, it looked amazing, right? That's what I mean about the cool, making it also seductive as well. So the thing I think very few people haven't cracked is, how do you balance the message with the medium the message is occurring in, right? For my last book, I interviewed a wonderful Holly Gordon who works for Participant. I don't know if you guys know her. She's the Chief Impact Officer at Participant. She's a Jedi. in this space, and she said the art always comes first. The art is the locomotive, and then we attach the message to it. But if the art isn't good, then the message is dead in the water. So the art has to come first, and then that's what participant will take Roma and say, okay, we've got to build domestic policy around household workers and take a bill into Congress. That's the piggyback that they're doing off the back of that incredible film. That's where they can take on those issues, but the art has to be good. What I haven't seen anybody figure out is a way to wrap the good in the cool, so that you're seeing that there, and it's part of the art as opposed to being a little caboose train that comes around. So I haven't figured that part out as yet, but I think what things like movies can do is create space in the culture to have those discussions, to get young people excited to say, well, let's talk about what would it look like to build a city like Wakanda, and then you can tie it into STEM education and things like that as well. So all this to say, I think the role of art is to make us think and create space, and then the role of policymakers, of nonprofits, is then to take that cultural energy, to take that cultural capital and transfer it into social capital next. So yeah, an imperfect answer, but I hope that helped a little bit to frame what you're talking about. Oh no, well, let's go drink in the bar and keep talking. Thank you guys.